Good morning, everyone. As you said, I'm Andrew Van Dorn. I'm the Chief Executive of HACT, which, for those of you who don't know who we are, with the Housing Association's Charitable Trust. And we have been working for some years now in kind of developing a way in which social landlords and others in the public sector, in the charitable sector and beyond can really think about how we measure our social impact and value the impact that we are driving. And we call that social value. And I'm going to talk through now kind of some of the thinking behind our approach, and also what you can do to be able to take a social value approach in your retrofit programs. And I think the first thing I would say is that it's really quite timely that we're having this conversation. There was a report kind of sponsored by the Greener Futures Partnership, done by the Centre for Social Justice, that was released towards the end of last year, and they recommended that programs like SHDF should have a social value framework that sits behind it, something that we're all kind of working towards and we're driving towards. And I'm going to say a little bit about why I think that's important, but also what we can do. So let's think about delivering social value in retrofit. And so I think the first thing I'm going to start with is this word impact. And it's really important that when we're thinking about social value, that we're being really clear about what it is that we're trying to do. And impact is an important concept in social value terms, because if we're not driving impact, and impact is about change, about things that are changing for communities and people who live in communities, then we're not really driving impact. So I really want you to think and hold in the front of your mind when you're thinking about social value, what are you doing that drives and delivers impact? And for us in social housing, but actually for us, I think across our society, there's a number of things that are going on, that's happening, that actually is where we want to affect change and where we want to think about the impact that we're driving. And the figures I've put on the screen in front of you, the first one is actually around fuel poverty. So this is the most recent figures that have been published by the National Energy Action. There's 6.5 million people living in fuel poverty. And that number has fluctuated over the last few years, and fluctuated mainly because of the energy price cap, and people move in and out of that kind of poverty as that has fluctuated. But actually, that's a significant number of people. It's about, just shy of 10% of the population of the UK living in fuel poverty. And many of those people are living in your homes, in social housing homes. The other figure there, which is it's not the most recent figure, but it's a figure of a few years ago, is about just roughly looking at how many people are living in poverty. And 14 million people, so double the numbers of living in fuel poverty, are more experiencing general poverty in the UK. And that's a figure from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. That figure's slightly higher now, it's about 14.4 million. But I don't know about you, but these figures don't make me feel comfortable. These figures are not the kind of things that I get up in the morning and think, it's great. There's 14 million people in the society in which I live in who are living in poverty. Some of which will be living in social housing. And I think when we're thinking about what are we trying to do, what are we trying to make impact on, I think that's something we have to make impact on. We have to find ways in which we can help and lift people out of poverty. And particularly when we're thinking about retrofit, also, what do we do? What are we doing that actually reduces fuel poverty and mean that people are able to heat their homes and keep their families warm? But the other part of social value is not just a kind of a UK-wide question. It sits within a kind of a global mission. And we talk about this, the UN Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs as they're known. And these are in front of you. So you can see there, you can already begin to see there that actually what we're doing in retrofitting our homes and what we're doing in working in communities is actually both has a benefit for individuals and families and communities, but it also has benefit for the globe, for the international context as well. And many of our lenders actually in the housing sector kind of frame their contribution around social value around the SDGs. So it's important to them, and I think that we can see there's a number of things that we are doing and we can be doing more of that really kind of contributes to those SDGs. But the other kind of concept that we're trying to think about more is this concept of a just green transition. So what we're trying to do in decarbonising our homes, but beyond that, within the whole kind of decarbonising our economy, is that we're trying to move to a position from where we are now, which is an economy which is polluting, is a carbon-rich economy, to something that's not that. A society and economy that kind of stays within those planetary boundaries in some respects. And that transition is not an easy transition. As you know, your contribution to that is predominantly around retrofitting homes, and that's a big contribution from a UK perspective. And there's other things, but there's other things that we're all trying to do, and I think that this concept of a just green transition is actually about how do we make sure that those people who are most marginalized already experience the worst inequalities, experience the worst poverty, actually are not overburdened with that transition. That actually, what can we do to really contribute to addressing those issues as part of this transition to a kind of a low carbon economy and a low carbon society? What can we do that makes it just? And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. But I think for me, there's kind of two principles that sit below this. And actually, we published a kind of a think piece probably about 18 months ago now around this question of a just green transition. And there were there were a number of things in there, but two core principles stood out. First of all, that we need to co-produce our retrofit and green energy solutions with tenants and residents. There's been a lot of work that has been done, and I'm sure you're doing a lot of work in your own organizations that kind of addresses this. Because if we can't cope, if we are doing work with people which is significantly disruptive, and that has to be co-produced. There were a lot of concerns out there from tenants and residents about what that means for them, about whether or not their homes are going to have kind of technology that's installed that could be more expensive, that could actually drive more kind of inequality and drive more fuel poverty. And I think that co-production piece is something that's really critical for us to get it right. And co-production is an important part of kind of how we think about social value as well. The second principle is that we need to kind of turn these challenges that we have, and we have significant challenges, particularly around skills and workforce, into opportunities. And I kind of often think about and hold a question in my mind, which is, if we're going to spend £104 billion, if that's the figure, I don't know if that's the figure anymore. I said that was a figure that was a few years old and may well have been increased because of inflation. If we're going to spend, say, more than £100 billion on retrofitting social housing in the UK, how do we ensure that is locked into our communities? How do we make and develop programs that really delivers that just green transition, but means that the value of that investment is left and sustainable within the communities in which it happens? And we can think about that hopefully in this session. So what is social value? And I think people get kind of caught up in a whole load of definitions around social value, but I think we need to just kind of strip some of that away and just say, really, put simply, it's a measurement of the benefits of the work that you do. It's the impact that you're making in communities. It's the programs that you are delivering in retrofit and actually beyond. As housing organisations and as people who work with housing organisations, there's lots that we are doing and can do, which is actually about delivering impact. And for us, we are clear that for us, social value is also about the valuation of that impact as well. But in social value terms, there's also a golden thread that we have to think about, and that's really drawn from how do we understand what's happening in the local communities in which we work, and bearing in mind that not all local communities are the same. There are significant differences between the different areas in which social housing is working. How do we understand that? How do we then work alongside those communities to look at what needs to change? How do we model the outcomes that they want to deliver? How do we then turn that modeling of outcomes into programs that we're delivering? How do we progress that and monitor that? And then how do we actually measure the impact? And then how do we use that kind of approach that then kind of refines and reviews and improves what we're doing? So we're really rooting our social value in those kind of needs and wants of the local communities. And I suggest that if we don't do that, we're not delivering impact. And there's lots of examples that has come across in the past where people have said, "Oh, we've done this thing, but no one's really been able to engage in it." And often the first question is, "Have you really engaged with the community to find out that's what they want and need?" And if the answer to that is no, then all we're doing is spending money rather than making change and delivering impact. So where is the retrofit opportunity here in this kind of space of trying to deliver impact, address issues around poverty, and to do that in a just way? So first of all, I mean, housing is responsible for 20% of the current UK carbon emissions. It's probably a little bit higher than that. Now it's about 20, just shy of 25%. And as I said before, we're spending quite a bit of money on this, and we're going to continue to spend money on this. We haven't got all the money in play yet. But however we look at it, if we're going to actually decarbonize homes across our sector, then it's going to cost a bit of money. So there's many challenges. We hear when we have these kind of seminars and we're talking to each other about what's going on. We talk a lot about how we're not quite sure whether we've got the right technology, and that space of technology keeps on advancing. We know that there's a significant kind of question around money and about where that's going to come from, and there is this people question as well, which is potentially one of the biggest risks that we have. Even if we had all the technology and the funding in the world that we needed, we actually don't have the workforce to do this. So investing in our workforce and the workforce of the future is going to become a key priority. And actually, that's a big opportunity for the retrofit thing. How can we drive that forward in communities where actually we know from surveys and experience that many social housing communities actually experience worse levels of unemployment than the rest of the population. The other thing about our retrofit kind of programs is that they're long-term programs. These are not whilst we might be in an individual's home for a short period of time, what we're doing over all of the homes that we manage is a long-term program. And therefore, it gives us a chance to think about how do we deliver long-term impact in a way that perhaps we don't always afford ourselves, but actually we need to. Because if one thing we know from being housing organisations, some of which have been around for centuries, we know that the experience of poverty in communities is something which is centuries old. So thinking into the long term is actually quite an important kind of opportunity that we have. And then I think that the other thing that I put on the table is, how do we think about retrofit as a regeneration opportunity? If we were think about the work we do in regeneration, when we come to regeneration and we're regenerating estates, we come at that with a whole kind of economic and social capital perspective. And we think about kind of not just what we're doing about the physical environment, but also what are we doing about the social environment. And in there, you see lots of really great social value programs over many years. I'm doing work chairing a social value program board for one of East London's big regeneration programs in Tower Hamlets. It's a 15-year program. So we're quite used to thinking in those terms in regeneration. So how do we kind of think in those terms around retrofit? It's not the same in as much as retrofit isn't actually about kind of not knocking down homes and rebuilding estates, but it is really something which is quite disruptive. So I think we can start to use some of the learning, some of the tools, some of the thinking, some of the muscle that we've developed over time about how we do regeneration and apply that to retrofit. So for HACT, what we do around social value is through our UK Social Value Bank, and we have a bank of values that have been developed with the sector. And mostly funded by the sector, to really measure the impact that we're driving. And on the screen at the moment are the kind of the domains that we already have within our social value bank. And our social value bank is based upon well-being valuation. It's based upon looking at what is the well-being improvement of people living in communities as a result of achieving an outcome. And within there, we've already got values that talk to changes in EPC ratings. We've got values that talk to homelessness, that talk to a whole range of activity, jobs, training, and things like that. But we're not just kind of stopping there. In June this year, we will be launching a whole new suite of values, which we're calling the Built Environment Social Value Bank, alongside the values that we've got. And actually that speaks to the complex supply chains of construction and development, and also of retrofit activity. Really kind of thinking about what more can we do to really model and think about the value that we're driving. So So we've got kind of already a set of an approach. We've got a way to deploy it, and it's a very simple way to deploy. We can forecast. We can think about what are we going to do, and we can model the impact that we're going to make, and that's the impact of improving the condition of homes as much as it is in kind of creating jobs or engaging with the community. And then we can also hold ourselves to account for that, and then to look at what actually do we deliver. And what I've put on the screen is just a few examples of some of the values that sit in the UK Social Value Bank at the moment. So if we improve our energy efficiency to band C, which is part of the SHDF programme, from E, F or G, it actually results in a kind of a social value uplift worth £3,221 per adult in the home. Similarly, if people are able to heat their household in the winter, it's worth about £13,500. And the rectification of serious condensation mold growth is about 6,500. What we're doing here is that we're observing the well-being uplift, and then we're basically saying this is the value of that uplift. And in simple terms, think of it as this is the kind of uplift in someone's well-being that would be observed if you gave them that amount of money. And actually, lots of things that we do have value. Sometimes we focus too much on the economic value and we forget that there's the social value. So at the core of our approach is a valuation methodology, and saying that there are these things that we are doing that's driving impact, and this is how we value it. I think the other figure that we put there is on full-time employment. If we're creating new jobs, we're creating, we're really investing in the green skills development. We're working in local partnerships between education, housing associations, local government, and others. Full-time employment is worth about £21,500 in social value. And that's a significant uplift for somebody. And that's on top of the economic value that they get from that by having a salary and a reduction, and a reduction in the cost of the state around benefits. So what we know is that these things have value. And what we need to do is really start to kind of put them into long-term partnerships that invest back into the communities, that actually creates that social value, and start to think about how do we model and how do we develop the right programs to do this. Some of you will know, and I hope you are all engaged in our retrofit credits program. So this is a program that we've brought forward that can generate a carbon credit on the retrofit work that you do. And in the carbon credit is that we've attached our social value methodology to it. So it's both observing carbon reduction as well as observing improvements in well-being. And this in front of you just gives you some examples of the kind of social value impact that's driven by different aspects of retrofit activity. And this is taken from the data that's been returned to us by the organisations who are part of our pilot. And we know that different types of work delivers different types of carbon reduction. We know that we when we're thinking about it, we're building kind of a way in which we're doing certain things first, because actually they're the most important to be able to make sure that the things that we do next actually have the most impact in reducing carbon. So if you're not already engaged in our retrofit credits program, please kind of reach out to us, come and become part of that, because this is about producing new income in some respects for you and the retrofit work that you do. And we piloted it a couple of years ago, and we're now in our next phase, where it's our second generation of the carbon credits itself. How does it work? Well, basically what we do is we look at we basically take profiles of the work that you're going to do, and then we calculate the reductions in carbon and the improvements in social value, or improvements in well-being, and that's the social value measurement. And then we go out and sell the credits to people who want to offset their carbon. What we can't do at the moment is produce that against SHDF funded work, but SHDF only funds part of the retrofit work you're doing. So we can do it we can generate the carbon credit on the non-SHDF funded aspect. So if HDF is funding, say, 50%, then we can do it on the other 50%. And that generates an income for an organization up to 2042. And here's just a few examples of, found in the pilot area. This pilot involved a number of organizations, and actually the modeling that we did, the credits that were actually generated and the income that was given in just the pilot actually equate to £2.9 million worth of social value. And that's just the retrofit activity itself. That's not anything around jobs and training. It's just the kind of reductions of carbon that have been delivered as part of the retrofit activity. What's interesting is you can see that the projected life, the projected income for the whole 20-year period, or those 101,481 credits, is worth 7.4 million. And it's about 10 to 15% of the cost of retrofit. And this is the first time that I think anyone has been able to really find a way to attach social value into something that then actually generates a kind of a physical pound rather than a kind of a social value pound. So let's now think about how we design it into our programs, and how do we best do that? And I think first of all is that we do it by thinking about the long-term transformational change of the work we're doing. All programs, no matter how of what scale they are, no matter the complexity they are, no matter over what period of time they might be or how they might be chomped up in program delivery, you can model and forecast social value. We can do that just with the retrofit activity, looking at EPC ratings and SAP, and we can do it looking at all the other aspects of how you might deliver it. To do that, what we do is we talk about this thing called a theory of change. And it's a very simple concept of what are you trying to do, what impact you're seeking to make, how you're going to do it, and then what are the outcomes you're going to achieve. And we can model that, as I said, on individual programs at a geographical level. We can model it at over periods of time, and we can model it for organizations of all different sizes and all different types. So modeling outcomes really helps you understand where your choices are. And this is where social value and the valuation of impact becomes really interesting, because there's lots of ways in which we can do things. And we make choices in our programs of how we do things. And we can model the impact and the different impact that gets delivered by the different ways in which you could do something, and help you think about which of those choices that you're going to make delivers the most impact, if that's of interest to you. And I'll give you some examples. So you might choose to do a program in a certain way with certain types of houses, and you might have a choice: do I do it this way with these houses, or this way with these houses? And in some respects, what we're doing always with our retrofit work is we're making some decisions and some choices. We know we can't do everything all at the same time, but we're trying to do, but over time we'll try and do it all. Where in those choices might there be differences in impact? And that's just the kind of thing that we can model with you. Procurement really helps deliver social value offers, and this is where, in some respects, we are probably seeing most social value conversations is around the procurement question. But I suggest to you that procurement is just one aspect of it. Procurement is the way in which we buy and the way in which we create partnerships. What needs to come from procurement is delivery, and it's in the delivery where social value actually gets done, and where impact gets driven. But we can bring it up front in procurement to kind of secure those social value offers. So designing procurement must be translated into the program action impact, and actually we need to monitor it on an ongoing basis, and we need to be held to account for it. And that's really how we then talk to our tenants and residents about the impact that we're driving, and how we use that information to be held accountable by them and by communities. And I think the other part of this is that if we put sustainability at the core of our approach, and we think about sustainability for people, for place and planet, then actually that's where we can maximize our social value in the design of our programs. I wanted to say before I finish something around retrofit and equity and social value, and this is really interesting because there's you're participating in a program of webinars that are being put on looking at this question of equity and EDI. And actually, I kind of wanted to think about that from a social value perspective. The first thing I'd say is that if we go back to that kind of golden thread of social value, and the thing I put on the table, which is understand what your communities want and need, we can't really start a conversation around inequalities and equity if we don't actually understand how that's being experienced within local communities. So we need to build those profiles. We need to really understand, and open data really helps that. Hack's got tools that help organizations to do that, but really building up those profiles of local communities and thinking about how we're planning our retrofit programs. Because some communities, and we know this, experience inequalities in a way that others don't. And again, if we're looking at if we're just looking at the asset itself, and we're not looking at the people who live in that asset and the people who live in those communities, then we're kind of missing the whole inequality piece, and we're missing the whole equity and EDI piece. So what do we understand about the people who live in our homes? What kind of intelligence and data do we have as landlords about the people who live in those homes? And what does that tell us? How do we build those profiles? And then kind of what impact does that make on our decisions? Because could we target our retrofit work at those individuals and those households where it could have most impact now? Because again, not all social housing residents are equal. Some experience significant inequalities, and particularly significant health inequalities in their families. Could we start to target things differently in our programs if we start to understand the people aspect alongside the asset performance aspect? And how do we have that conversation? Because what we know is that neighbors will look at each other and go, why am I getting that and you're not, and you're getting that, and they're different things. It might well be that the reason why things are happening in certain places before others is because we know it will drive a bigger impact for people who are experiencing the worst inequalities. And then I think the other question about skills is, could we start to target our skills development at certain groups of people? We know that some people in our communities are much further away from the labour market than others, and actually experience significant barriers into work. And there's a lot of work that we do in housing through our community investment teams that actually helps people into education, training, and employment programs. There's more for us to do in really thinking how we help them into the kind of jobs and work that really helps us and helps deliver the green skills requirement. And there's work that we're doing at Hatch, and as many others are doing, in kind of helping collaborations at a local level between housing associations, local colleges, and retrofit kind of suppliers, to really look at that question of how do we help develop some of those local pathways. But we can target those at different groups of people who are perhaps experiencing most disadvantage, experience most inequity, and also experience the most inequalities. And as I said before, these are some of the choices that we can make. We've got a big program of work to do. It is in our gift to decide how we do that. So it is in those choices and in those conversations where we can start to think about how we really drive impact, and also how we model that, we measure that, we create partnerships around that, and then how we deliver it and we hold ourselves to account. So all of this is actually about being intentional, and it's about elevating social value questions into a conscious conversation with each other. We know that long-term collaborations have much more potential for impact, and we see that in development and regeneration. We should be able to see that in net zero. We should be able to see that in our retrofit programs, because these are long-term programs. But how do we model that? How do we deliver that over the long term? How do we grasp those opportunities? We know that the needs and aspirations of communities change over time. So how are we constantly being kind of engaged with that, and working with organisations who can demonstrate flexibility of leadership at the local level? And how do people involved in retrofit engage with people involved in community investment in your same organisations to really work collaboratively together in those communities? We know that engagement is key to securing the best outcomes. And when we don't engage, or when we disengage with tenants and communities, we get stung, and we don't deliver very well. So how do we broker this space together, and how do we be ambitious together? Because actually our communities need us to be ambitious together. How do we be accountable? And being accountable, how does that build confidence within communities is a really important question. How we monitor that, how we report on impact, how do we help each other understand what even some of these concepts mean? And then finally, kind of creating social value takes resources and expertise. So how do we build that within our own organizations, within our supply chains, within our communities, so that we can all deliver the best impact that we possibly can? My final thought for you is this. We are long-term businesses, and the investments that we are making in our homes today are going to have an impact in the long term, because the homes that we are retrofitting and the people that we're working with are going to be there for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We are a built environment sector that's based on assets, and assets that we hope, don't crumble. So how are you being a good ancestor? How are you making the right decisions today in your organizations, with your colleagues, with your communities, and with your supply chain, that actually means that the investment you're making is the best that you can be as an ancestor for the impact that's going to be delivered in the next 50 years? And I'll end there.